Okay, hi everybody. My name is Richard.lesperance. I go by the name of my man Richard. Welcome to a better lifestyle. Today I have the pleasure to have Brenton Harrison with me. Brenton is a financial advisor and he is also the host of the podcast New Money, New Problem. I think you guys are gonna really enjoy this episode. He's a man of wisdom, and I saw a lot of his recording, and he's a pretty smart individual. I think you guys are gonna benefit from that episode. Welcome, Brent. Welcome, Brent, into the podcast. First of all.
Thank you so much for having me.
Great, that's my pleasure. So I'm gonna go into directly because you know what we're talking about. We're talking about money, so sometimes people don't want to talk about that, but it's very important. Without it, you can't function. Why do today we're talking about people who are making a lot of money, like high earners. So why do you say that is it's dangerous for people when they start making a lot of money?
It part of it is born from my lived experience. I'm the child of two people who were the first in their family to earn a high amount of money. So I got to see multiple elements of danger in their life. And some of it that played out was the first is if you don't have a ton of people around you who have earned what you are earning, you don't really have anybody that you can go to for advice to make sure that you don't fall into certain traps, right? There's a whole lot of wisdom that you glean from others that keeps us from making mistakes. If you're a child, you don't put your hand on a hot stove, not because you know it's hot, but because there's an adult to tell you if you put your hand on that stove, it's going to burn. The other thing that you see is because of a lack of financial literacy, when you get into spaces where you haven't been before, the odds and the risks are bigger. So, for example, if you have someone who is earning a lower income, well, they can make some really big financial mistakes and they are devastating to that person. If you talk about the dollar amounts at risk for a higher income person, if they don't know what they're doing, they're simply more at risk because there's more dollars at risk. And the last thing is in most countries, there is some sort of social safety net, whether it's a pension or social security or whatever it is in your domicile. And the more you make, the less a percentage of that income is replaced in your retirement years. So you can have somebody who's a lower income person who lives within their means. And if they get to their retirement years, they're going to have a much higher portion of their income replaced when they stop working than a high income earner who's going to be more responsible for making sure they're okay in retirement. So everybody has financial problems. It's more of the fact that if you're a high income earner and you don't have that support system, there's nobody coming to make up that gap between social safety and what you need to get by.
So all these things that you mentioned, those are the mostly like psychological patterns that people fall into in most cases.
Absolutely. There's a book that I think is an excellent book in terms of teaching us how we feel about money. It's called Mind Over Money by Brad and Ted Klontz. And what they found is that the overwhelming majority of how we feel about money, the emotional reaction it gives us, is formed before our teenage years. It's all based on stuff that we observed from the people around us. But the problem is when you're trying to make those observations as a child, you don't know the full story, right? You're not even capable of understanding the full context of what you're seeing. So for many of us, there are negative observations and emotions that we have attached to money. And when we actually start earning them, if we're not aware of them, they can do real damage to our finances. So it's not really possible to like completely change who you are. But if you don't know how money makes you emote, then you can put yourself in positions where you're acting in a way that's not logical. It's all emotional and it does a negative or has a negative impact on what you're spending.
A lot of time it's the lifestyle that they go into. What, because to me, sometimes when I hear these stories, like people who earn six figures, like from let's say 100K or 250K, like in one of your videos that you were talking about, for me, for them to be in trouble in like financially or not proper or not manage their money properly seems like, I don't know, like maybe the cost of living where they are, or what is it exactly that makes them fall into those traps?
It could be several things. Some of it could be cost of living and decisions that they've made. You know, hey, I went to this school and I didn't think I had a great experience, so I'm earning more. Maybe I send my children to private schools. Or, hey, I lived in a house that was small and I'm earning a good amount of money now, so maybe I go buy the biggest house I can find, regardless of whether it's the right house for me. But then sometimes it is the emotional elements of it. You have people where you earn a certain amount of money, but that amount of money scares you. There's literally a financial disorder called financial avoidance, where you earn a certain amount of money, but because the idea of learning about money, dealing with money scares you, you avoid it. So you don't plan around it, you don't budget, and that can lead to problems as well. You also have people, depending on their social circumstance, where they may have family pressures. Your family may be earning a fifth of what you're making. And it's not that they're trying to mooch off of you. Sometimes they just need help. And if you're in a position where you're earning good money, but you're not earning so much that you can support two or three households, that can sometimes be an issue as well.
I had someone before on my podcast. He was talking about, I want to know your thoughts on that. He was saying like in regards to financial literacy, it's a continuing education in regards, well, it should be because you should have in different stages of your life, like before you start working, you should know about financial literacy. Once you start working, and then if your income, like I said, well, if it increases or you transition from an employee to a business owner, it has different stages. And from those different stages, you need like financial literacy. What's your take on that?
I agree. I think that having financial literacy is like learning a language that a lot of people don't speak. And I think that not having it is something that can destroy your finances. And the thing that's unique about financial literacy is the more you earn, the a different set of circumstances reveals themselves, whether it's with taxes, whether it's with insurance, whether it's for planning for your estate. So the financial literacy that you have actually has to increase and adjust the more you make. So it doesn't just end with learning how to budget. You know, the more you make it, it starts to evolve into I have to have a budget and I have to understand insurance. I have to understand taxes. So it is a continuous process of making sure that your literacy is keeping step with your income.
What would you say is the percentage of high earners that are in uh, are in trouble or they don't uh, properly manage their money?
Well, there are studies that show that over 30% of people who earn over $250,000 don't have a month's worth of savings. So I don't know the exact percentage in terms of like what constitutes trouble, but I know that there's a much higher percentage than people think of those who earn a great amount of money who are just as close to being in a like, financial disrepair if something were to happen in an emergency situation. So again, there's levels to everything. I'd much rather be earning $250,000 and having no savings than earning $30,000 and having no savings. But in both scenarios, if a person doesn't save, they're 1 month from being in trouble.
Uh, would you say single people have a harder time than people who are married with kids and all that?
In some situations, the thing that makes it very difficult is you don't have a second person who is supporting and saving towards whatever your objective is. So you're trying to grow wealth. It's a lot easier in many cases to do with two people than it is with one. On the other hand, when you have a partner, you have to make sure you're aligned financially with that partner. And that can, present its own challenges if you're not working towards the same objective. And I've even seen situations where the partner's way of dealing with finances actually detracts from what the other person is trying to do because they're spending everything, right? So it really depends, but I would say in most cases, trying to do it alone is more difficult.
So what are some solutions that you have?
Well, if you are single, then it's highly likely that you're going to need more in emergency reserves than a dual income household, right? So a dual income household may be able to get away with having 3 months expenses set aside if they are both in stable industries. If you are single, then really no matter how stable your industry is, you might need 6 months of reserves in case an emergency happens. You also need to make sure that you are taking advantage of everything that's around you, whether that's benefits at your job, whether that's investment accounts that are available to you, and make sure that you're like continuing to build up a working knowledge of how these things work. I always encourage people to have a mindset of like curiosity when it comes to financial literacy, because so many times I'll come across people where they don't know something naturally, it intimidates them, so they avoid it altogether. Instead, I would encourage you to dive headfirst into the things that you don't know so that you can start to get a feel for like what needs to be in your portfolio versus what doesn't fit in your portfolio. Something that's a perfect investment for me may just frighten somebody else to pieces. So you have to kind of increase that knowledge and start to put together a portfolio of things that speak to what you're trying to do financially.
In regards to saving and investing, there's I don't want to say pros and cons in regards to saving because if you save, uh, the purchasing power over time diminish. So talk to us about that.
Well, you want to optimize your savings. And I think when people hear savings, they think savings account. I'm putting money aside for reserves or for a rainy day. So that means I have to put it all in the savings account in my bank. But you can layer your savings and optimize it. So, for example, you might have 1 month's expenses in your traditional bank. It's great because you can access it immediately. There's likely little to no fees for that account. You don't have to have any certain balance before they penalize you. So that may be a great place for a month or two of expenses. Anything beyond that, maybe you're from months 3 to 6, you might consider putting it in a high yield savings account. That might have a small fee associated with it, but you're getting a higher rate of return on what you're putting aside. And it's less of a big deal that it typically takes a day or two to get it back into your bank account because you do have that first layer of savings in your traditional account. Well, beyond that, you might consider things like a brokerage account where people will hear terms like Robinhood or Webull. Those are just examples of brokerage companies where you have an account where you can invest inside of it, but you can access that money in 3 to 4 business days if you needed it. So savings doesn't mean that all of it has to be in savings. It just means that you have access to it. So you don't want to have everything in cash, to your point, but you do want to make sure that you're liquid and can access funds if needed in that order.
What about the investing tips that like let's say someone is doing their due diligence and they're doing okay with their money, they have extra and surplus or even their savings is on the side and they want to invest let's say at $10,000. What would you say or would be some rule of thumbs?
I would say start as wide as possible. And then the more money you have that you can risk losing, you can narrow your focus. What I mean by that is if I had $10,000 and yes, clearly I'm comfortable with losing some of it because I'm putting it in the market, but you can't lose a significant amount. I would want you to be in the most diversified investment as possible that invests in as many companies as possible. Well, as you get more money, and as you increase your literacy and knowledge of what you're doing when it comes to investing, then you can start to narrow your scope down to things like single stocks and things of that nature. But I see people doing the reverse. They have some money to invest. They heard some hot stock tip that a friend told them at the water cooler, and they go straight into that one company. Well, you're really putting aside money in a company that you don't know much about. You don't have much experience investing, and you really can't afford to lose a significant portion of that money. So I would encourage people to start wide and then narrow your focus as your account balance increases.
So if they want to build wealth in the long term, would it be almost the same strategy or it would be something different?
No, it's the same strategy. You'll find things like the pyramid of investments where they're showing you the base, and you'll see things like high yield savings accounts, brokerage accounts, index funds, exchange traded funds. The higher up you get on that pyramid, you're talking about things that may have, the higher opportunity for return, but also a higher opportunity for risk. And that's when you see things like private placements and cryptocurrency and things of that nature. And the reason that pyramid exists is to show you that you really don't need to involve yourself in the things at the top until you've taken care of the things at the bottom to make sure that you're insulated from risk as best as possible. So if you're building wealth in the long term, even people who have a tremendous amount of money, they need to get that tremendous amount of money before they start going to the riskier things. They start with the foundational elements.
Another thing, in regards to in your own experience, did you had issues in managing money?
Yeah, again, I told you I'm the product of people who earned a high income but were not told how to manage it. But going back to what I said about picking up things in childhood, I have two very extreme examples of managing money that in some cases helped me, but in other cases have hurt me. My mother absolutely hates owing anybody a dollar. So she would rather have no money in her pocket but not owe anybody than have a ton of money in her pocket and owe somebody $10. So to me, I don't have that same level of extreme thought when it comes to owing people, but I do have like a physical, visceral reaction when I owe people money. It stresses me out. I get that from my mother. My father is the type of person who feels like he can outwork anything. So if there's any problem in life, I'm just going to go earn more money and earn my way out of it. And to me, that can stress me out as well, because if I'm in a stressful situation in my personal life, in my financial life, my default is almost to just throw my head into work in a way that's not even as much financial as it is emotional. And in both cases, it can cause me problems. So I have to have an awareness of both sides of what my parents, kind of put in me and I bring to the table to make sure I can manage around those elements of my personality.
Student loans are a big issue. Talk to us about that.
Yeah, so federal and private student loans to me are one of the biggest barriers to wealth that older generations don't understand, right? Or they underestimate. So you see these kind of get off my lawn people who talk about, oh, well, if they borrow the money, then they should just pay it back. And they don't understand. There's people out there with 400, $500,000 worth of student loans or $200,000 worth of student loans for a degree that is only earning them $50,000 in income. And when you have that amount of debt, it can prevent you from doing almost anything else financially. So to me, we work with a lot of student loan borrowers and we encourage them to learn the language of their student loan debt in the same way that they would learn another language. Because student loan debt is one of the most complex forms of debt that you can find. But if you understand the rules, it is also one of the most flexible forms of debt in terms of how you repay it. But figuring that out takes a tremendous amount of time and effort. So to me, I think that we come across people who are in a position where, depending on programs for which they're eligible, they can have their loans forgiven. And if I'm going to have my student loans forgiven, I want to have it forgiven after I pay the absolute least amount of money possible. So I want to teach them how to do that. We have other people who are going to have to pay off their loans in full. And for those people, we try to encourage them to position their loans as best as possible so that they can repay it while also addressing other elements of their finances, like saving and investing, and that those don't get sacrificed, for their student loan debt.
You talked, correct me if I'm wrong, you talked before about in one of your videos about tax issues and tax bills. Talk to us about that.
Yeah, so there's a concept in finances called reverse discrimination, where the more money you earn, the more penalized you are in certain situations, and taxes are one of those areas. And almost any place that you can find, the more money that you make, there's different taxes that you're subject to. So in the United States, we have things like the Medicare surcharge tax, where if you earn a certain amount of money, you pay an additional percentage in Medicare taxes than people who earn at lower levels. We have the net investment income tax, where if you earn a certain amount, then the interest income that you earn on your savings account, the investment income from your brokerage account, you're paying an extra tax on top of those items. There's all other types of taxation where, again, the more that you earn, the financial literacy for that level of income has to increase because there's ways to plan around or mitigate some of those taxes, but you wouldn't even be subject to them at lower income levels. So that's another area that you see the higher income that you earn, tax strategies become even more crucial than at lower levels.
And there's one more thing you were talking about, the value of a dollar. Like the more you make, uh, I think people don't value the dollar as before. Talk to us about that.
Yeah, let's think about this. Let's say that I have after I, have taxes and employee benefits taken out of my check, I have $1,500 and I need to make it from, August 15th to the beginning of September. Well, I'm going to be pretty careful after I pay my rent, after I pay my utilities to make sure that I'm not spending a tremendous amount of money on other things. So if I go to the movies and the movies now have raised their prices so that they're $5 more than they were, the last time I went, if I had $1,500 for the entire month, I'm gonna really pay attention to that $5. I'm gonna notice it, right? I might decide the next Friday, okay, I can't go to a movie every Friday. I'm gonna watch something at home. Well, if after I pay my taxes and employee benefits, I instead have $10,000, I don't even notice that $5. It's irrelevant to me. And it's not because, $5 is more or less money. It's the same amount of money to both people. But when you're earning more, you don't pay as close attention to changes in pricing and spending habits as you do at lower income levels. So we see a lot of high income earners that are just bleeding money in certain areas for things that are basic. Hey, did you realize that you and your partner are both signed up for two separate Netflix accounts, right? Hey, it's $20 a month that you're throwing away, but because you're earning more money, you just don't pay attention to it. At a lower income level, you pay attention to those things. The problem is, even though you're earning more money, because you're not paying attention, those things rack up. So now you're bleeding money in 10 or 15 different places, and it might add up to $500, $1,000 a month. And then it's real money, but you haven't been paying attention as it accumulated.
Talk to us about your podcast, New Money, New Problems.
Yeah, so I have a bi-weekly podcast called Escape Student Loan Debt, where we talk about federal and private student loans. And then I have the weekly New Money, New Problems podcast. And that's the main podcast where we aim to give people the tools to be financially literate at high income levels. We find that not only is there a lack of literacy when you're earning money for the first time, but also there can be a shame involved with that lack of literacy. So our podcast is designed to kind of take the stigma out of earning good money, but not knowing what to do with it. So we try to make it a comforting, welcoming place to learn the stuff that you were never taught when it comes to money.
Last words in regards to everything we talked about.
Yeah, to me, regardless of your income level, financial literacy is important. But to me, I wouldn't want to be in a position where I'm becoming financially literate once I earn that money. Like you said, it's an ongoing process. And we find that similar to the way people can be intimidated by a physician, you go to the doctor's office and there may be something that's wrong with you, but you're afraid to ask that doctor because it's just an intimidating environment. People feel the same way about money. It's a subject that people often avoid because that lack of knowledge is daunting. I would encourage anybody to say, hey, I'm going to have a mindset that there is no piece of information that is too complex, too highbrow for me to learn. I'm going to take the challenge of becoming more financially literate. And as your income increases, it will reap large rewards.
Where can people learn more about you and follow you?
If you go to newmoneynewproblems.com/subscribe, it will allow you to get on our newsletter and it will give you all of the information you need. We have free downloads and resources for things like taxes and budgeting. We have private podcast feeds where we not only have the main podcast, but listener question and answer sessions, webinars, things of that nature. We send out events around financial literacy that we think people would benefit from. So that's the main place to find us, newmoneynewproblems.com/subscribe.